Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Town Council and School Committee Joint Work Session. It's Wednesday, January 15th, 2014, and let's all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Could I have a glass of water or pass it down?
So we're here tonight for a discussion regarding the capital improvement program for the year 2014 through 2015 through 2019 to 2020. We're going to discuss long-term financial programs, school programs, and proposed capital budget for the school program, and the school committee proposed CIP. So I guess you take it away, Steve, or Kristen.
I'm going to turn everything over to our superintendent, but before I do, I would just indicate that there are copies of the handouts. We'll be going through a number of slides. Kristen will present first, and then I'll have a couple of additional slides to sum up where we are within the capital program for both the 6-year program and for the proposed capital budget for the 14-15 year. So I've filibustered enough to get the light on the screen, so you're all set.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Same
Delighted
to
to
you.
be back, this time with a voice, which makes it so much more enjoyable to converse with you all and to present. We had an evening last night with the school committee where they were able to view our capital budget presentation. It's a very interesting capital conversation for me. This is my 5th year as superintendent, and it's the first time I've really come to you with some bonded programs. So it's a little longer explanation than it has been in the past. I did not bring a Prezi for your viewing pleasure today. It became very complicated for folks to read the printed slides, and so you're seeing the old and steady PowerPoint.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You could have said, "Aw, shucks, we missed that," in creativity and ingenuity.
We're old. We're old. We
So,
can't see that.
the first slide is on our bonded program. Prior to 2009, there was a facilities audit, typically budgeted $1 million annually for capital projects. And then beginning in 2009, every other year, capital projects were maintained. And then in 2010, it was an unscheduled year and no capital projects were planned. And that went on for a couple of years in terms of the uncertainty in the state revenue, in terms of really our need for some capital endeavors. And this fiscal year 2015 is the first capital projects planning with an accompanying facilities audit. This really is for information for the general public to talk about, well, why would you have a capital improvement plan? Why is it required by the Department of Ed? It's really to ensure that school districts are conducting that long-term facilities plan and look. And Rhode Island Department of Education requires a 5-year plan, and in South Kingstown, we've typically done a 6-year plan. Last night at the school committee meeting, the school committee thought it would be important for the public to know that there is a clarification. Even though we didn't have capital projects planned, that doesn't mean that we weren't scheduling budget items to deal with upkeep to buildings and grounds and certainly general maintenance repairs. There is a difference between those general maintenance items and capital projects. As you know, capital projects are larger in scope. They're typically a non-reoccurring expenditure. They're typically to construct or renovate fixed assets that are of a particular dollar amount. And I gave examples of capital projects, could be roofs or bleachers, typically replacing heating systems, could be computer purchases. We also talked a little bit, as a reminder, about school housing aid, what the definition is, that our capital projects would qualify for school housing aid, and there is a housing aid formula for reimbursement that's based on free and reduced lunch levels of school districts. The current reimbursement, typically the reimbursement minimum was 30%. It was recently raised to 35%. So our current reimbursement that we're expecting on these capital projects is at 35%. We conducted, as you know, a facilities audit. RGB was the company that did this comprehensive facilities plan, an analysis, an inspection of our sites, of our architectural and structural and plumbing elements, HVAC, electrical, technology, et cetera. They took a look at the diagrammatic floor and site plans, and we conducted that site analysis beginning on June 11th, 2013. I've also included the RIDE Necessity for School Construction application so that folks could see all of the different stages of this work if that was of interest to them. And I'll go on to briefly describe those stages for you in our own timeline. But these are our live links. My PowerPoint has been uploaded to the school committee and the town website. And so if folks in the community are interested in taking a look at the entirety of the application process through RIDE, it's a new application process as of May of 2008. I've also included the necessity for school construction regulations, that certainly schools and towns can construct a new building anytime they wish, but if they would like to be eligible for housing aid, there's laws that govern that process. And so I put a link to the regulations that were changed as of 2007. Stage 1 approval, the districts must submit an architectural feasibility study to include initial energy modeling, et cetera. That's reviewed by RIDE and either approved, returned to the district for further information, or disapproved. We have submitted and we received approval on stage 1 of the process on December 23rd. Once RIDE approves that initial approval, then really the hard work begins, and the district has 1 year to complete stage 2 of the application. I put in the PowerPoint all of the features of stage 2, but I think more important to our discussion this evening are what the dates look to be projected for our community. So the RGB study was started in June of 2013, completed in August. School committee approved the capital plan in September, and then as revised by the manager on November 12th. RIDE stage 1 approval on December 23rd. We're anticipating, based on your meeting schedule, that the town council would be in a position to approve the capital plan on the 27th of January. And then by that date, we've already spoken to the Rhode Island Department of Education, and they have, they thought that the stage 2 approval would be estimated to be approved by March 14th. Trying to power down my phone here.
Kristen, can I just ask you, what does RGB stand for?
Robinson, Green, and Beretta.
Oh.
They're the engineering firm.
Oh, okay.
Then enabling legislation to the General Assembly would occur on March 14th, and the anticipated Rhode Island Board of Education approval, May 14th, and there is a little asterisk there. We know that the necessity for school construction projects are under a current moratorium. And so if all of our capital projects don't qualify under the lens of health and safety, which is not included in the moratorium, then the date for the Rhode Island Board of Education approval would be July 1st, and that's when the moratorium is scheduled to sunset. If all of those pieces fall into place, then work would begin on July 1st, and then the town would go out to for bonds in November. We are required by the Rhode Island Department of Education to establish a building committee in the same manner that if you were constructing a new site, you would have to establish a building committee. And folks or roles on that building committee are advised by RIDE. We would be required to have the maintenance director, Bob DeRocha, who is here this evening to answer any detailed questions that you have. Give a little wave, Bob. John Rashat in his capacity as Chief Financial Officer. I would serve. Vin Murray, the town planner. Raisa Mosher was appointed last evening by the school committee as the school committee's representative. We would have principal representation on projects that affect a particular school, so not one single principal would be, we haven't told the principals that yet. That would be nice, that would have been a nice surprise. It's not one singular principal, it's a project based on the discussion on the project of that school, principals would rotate. So when we were talking about Matunic, Deb Zepp would serve. We were talking about the high school, Bob McCarthy, et cetera. We also would need to provide a community member and credentials as recommended by RIDE. Typically, you're looking for someone in the community who has an engineering background or something similar so that they could bring their lens to the discussion. And so Mr. Rashat will need to seek out a community member to serve on the committee. I know that the manager will go through this in much more detail later, but we are anticipating, and has previously been accepted by the school committee, that to share in the funding of this work, and that we are anticipating $274,000 from the South Road Fund, which was collected through previous lease, and $903,000 from our undesignated fund balance. On the next series of slides, I'm identifying by building where the projects are occurring or scheduled to occur. We are 2013-14 is of course the current year, so I'm going to ground you in that. That would be the darker shaded gray column. And the 14-15 year is the planned budget year, which is the focus of this evening's discussion. But certainly because we are, it's a 6-year plan that was approved by the school committee and hopefully will be supported by the council, we have the ability to talk about any of the items scheduled. For the high school, you're seeing that emergency lighting scheduled for fiscal year 19, backflow prevention fiscal year 16, corridor renovation $480,000 fiscal year 16, stairwell renovation in fiscal year 15, skylight repair and rescue windows installation in fiscal year 18, mechanical room renovation and third floor renovation in fiscal year 17, original building roof replacement in fiscal year 20, and the boiler chimney roof in fiscal year 19. Total over 6 years of $1.9 million.
Kristen, maybe just in terms of a little bit of background, this is the analysis that was done by RGB. And what it did was it went through every single school building, and with each of the buildings, what it did is it provided a recommendation looking at what the priority of improvements were that were necessary. I think overall, the overall cost of every item were done within that which was written up was well over $10 million. Many of those items were associated with maintenance type things that John and I would pull out of the analysis. What we looked at for the first 6 years was to look at the highest priorities. That was those things needing immediate action, those things that were necessary for code purposes. Those were the key issues, and also looking at building envelopes and life safety issues. So the reason you've got this level of detail and the priorities there is a method to the madness. The method is looking at what the prioritization was based on what the consultant found, and then the school department sitting down, I think John and Bob sat down, came up with a schedule. I sat down and met with them after I had gone through the detail as well, and we came up with what we saw as being the highest priorities that could be accomplished within about a $6.5 million program. So a number of these items here, they're going to change throughout the years if in fact on a yearly basis, when we revisit capital programming, we look at it and say something's jumped up in priority. But as far as some of the core items, the more expensive things, particularly at the high school with things like the stairwell renovations, that, as well as the corridor renovations, these are major projects that really need to be scheduled in the immediate future. So you're seeing those. Some of the other things are things that may be done potentially through a maintenance function, but the key is from within that book. I think the council will recall, we've talked about having the facilities analysis completed for probably the last 4 years. School department had moved forward, did get it done over the course of the summer, and it was very instructive as to being able to put together, I think, what's really a much more viable capital improvement program. It just then required the mechanics of being able to build the financial integrity into the implementation schedule. So I just wanted to make you aware that what you're seeing here is not every single item that was presented as a probable facility enhancement or improvement, but rather those that met either code requirements or in terms of immediate need. A few items did jump in that had to be done because you're not going to fix a parking lot if you haven't fixed the drainage. You're not going to, deal with exterior building improvements if, in fact, there's a leaking roof. You're not going to do things interior. So the mechanics had to be looked at as far as the scheduling that's here. That's why it may look a little bit odd on why things are in what year, but it is based on as good of an analysis of what was presented through the research study. And that's a key for us to be able to move forward with what Kristen's talking about now in terms of going through the state system to be able to get the certification to be able to get reimbursements. So I didn't mean to.
Thank you for saying that. No, I think that's important, and we've sort of lived the process, so I apologize for not realizing that, that there was a larger context that had to be presented to, but thank you so much for doing that. The Hazard School, there are no planned projects through fiscal year '20. Curtis Corner Middle School, you're seeing some significant projects. Your 2 years, especially fiscal year '15, mechanical, electrical area, water prevention, repair and replace flashing, install backflow prevention, and then in fiscal year '20, replace unit ventilators, which is a major project. At Broad Rock School, no planned projects. Matunic Elementary School, the work would start for fiscal year '16 with foundation repair and drainage improvement, and then in fiscal year '17, roof replacement, and then in fiscal year '19, replacing the HVAC. At Peacedale, fiscal year '15, roof replacement, which is the slate roof, roof replacement on the addition, and those are the projects in that period. At Wakefield, the work would begin for fiscal year '16, replace the 1990 wing roof, replace unit ventilators, and then in fiscal year '20, exterior doors and windows. West Kingston Elementary, we're looking at fiscal year '16 site drainage. '17 would be the 1990 wing roof repair. Fiscal year '18 HVAC system. And those are the projects at West Kingston. No planned projects at South Road. No planned projects at the administration building. And then this slide shows you the totals. So you're looking at roughly $900,000 in fiscal year '15, $1.1 million in '16, $1.3 million in '17, $991,000 in '18, approximately $1 million in '19, and $1.1 million in '20, with a total of $6.5 million over the 6-year period. We also, at this time, have a conversation with you all about the capital purchase program that's held within our operating budget. For this conversation, that would be the 5,200 account, and it's in fiscal year '15, which is our current budget conversation. It's important to note, particularly for new members or community members that this is not additional funding outside of the operational budget. It is the school department planned operating budget, and we just provide it for your information so that you know the other capital plans that are going on. The technology features should be very familiar to you. We are on a technology replacement schedule, so we are looking at the high school computer lab, elementary computer lab, computer workstations, and typical replacements and network hardware. So this is not anything having to do with any other projects. This is our typical scheduling. And then you'll also, outside of technology, see in a given year, there may be an athletic program need, like the gym floor and the track that you've had in years past, or you might see a maintenance request. Last year it was a vehicle replacement. So this year we're looking at the bleacher replacements at the high school and Curtis Corner Middle School. John can give you more detail, but they've gotten into to the point where they need to be replaced. And so we want to make certain that they remain at the highest level of safety, and so they need to be scheduled for this year. This showcases our plan, and as the manager discussed, we're continually finding that as we're monitoring these projects, that there is a change in priority. So you saw with the gym floor and the track that all of a sudden, even though we thought we could plan it in the out years, it becomes a current need, and so then it moves up in the schedule. I think we have a great deal of fidelity with our capital planning, and you're seeing every single year that we have planned to replace high school computer lab. We have several high school computer labs, so they're on a rotating schedule of replacement. And then the middle school and elementary computer labs are also on a rotating schedule, and sometimes our phone systems, our administrative computers, those are teacher computers, and also clerical and administrator computers, or replacement computers, hardware, painting projects. Really, we haven't had a painting project that I can recall in my tenure, and so they come back on in 2017, and I hope to come to you and say that at that time it remains a priority, but it sometimes doesn't. It takes the place of another more pressing need, although I believe having a fresh coat of paint is very beneficial to the teachers and to the students. Vehicle replacement, usually we schedule one every other year. We don't do that because we need a shiny new vehicle. We've gotten to the point where the vehicles, the last one in the fleet is so old that it's in dire need, because when we meet in August, we go through very specifically, what are the priorities, can we move anything, and if something becomes a priority in another area, we try to stick to about $300,000 of our budget dedicated for this unless there is an emergency. This year, the sort of unique features, the bleachers and our wonderful track will come around again in 2018. I'm so I know so much about the tracks now, how many lanes, what kind of little black tar sticks in your shoes, that I don't even think I'm going to need Mr. Lynch to come to that discussion. But we've laid it out for your review this evening, and that really is the end of my presentation, but I'm certainly happy to answer any questions, as is Mr. Rashat, and we'll give a signal to Mr. DeRocha when it gets really technical.
Do you? Well, if you don't, I just had, go ahead. I just wanted to ask about the computer equity replacement. Is that just replacing computers, so that's not adding to?
Right, that's just replacing in classrooms, non-lab.
And now, we were talking, I think, different meetings, we've talked about the park assessment and the need for more computers.
That's outside of this.
That's outside of this, okay. And the only other question I had is, what about the high school, the outdoor area there, the courtyard is, I mean, we had that beautiful presentation, which was wonderful, but I know that the money for that was nowhere, so.
Mrs. Mrs. Mosher is going to
Oh,
respond,
great.
because she's on that.
So I'm on
team.
that committee, and
Yeah.
we still meet probably every other month. The update now is that they received a $100,000 Champlain grant.
Oh.
I don't know if you had received that information. They were supposed to send out a blast to the newspapers and that kind of thing. Did you not know that?
I saw that.
So anyway, they had applied for that grant money, and they were awarded that grant. That's going to go to specific things. They want to see something done. So that's, the team is coming up with that plan for them. And then they're also looking at other grant opportunities. Certainly, there is discussion about coming back and speaking to the town, but they're looking at many alternate sources of funding for that project. But it is still moving along. Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
How much do we actually pay for free and reduced lunch? I know this is state mandated as well, but I didn't know what the percentage of his children that were utilizing that program.
I think it's 18%, but I have it on one of my other slides, so if you just give me a moment, I can come to that. It's direct federal reimbursement, though. We don't end up paying for the students' lunches. It's direct federal reimbursement to us
Right, that's
through a
what
program.
I thought it was, well, actually, I thought it was the state, but I just didn't know how that was managed, handled, and that was a question that I had as well.
17%. So it was 13% in 2009, 16 in 2010, 17 in 11, 18 in 2012. We took a small decline in 2013 at 17%. Certainly.
Jim, your hand's not high enough. Not kidding.
That's perfectly fine, Mr. O'Neill.
Does the state have any idea with all the school districts, what the volume request will be for dollars? I mean, it looks like we've got 6 million, but I don't know what the rest of the state's looking at here. We're looking at $100 million, 50? Is there gonna be competition for money? We shouldn't be building new schools with populations dropping everywhere but Providence, so how are we competing for this, and how can we hope to get our share?
There are communities other than Providence whose populations are growing. They are mostly urban communities, but there are some suburban communities that are showing either stable growth. Smithfield has stable growth, and Coventry is showing an increasing growth. But there are, as you can imagine, lots of thinking about projects and projects planned. I don't know if you know specifically the projects. Go ahead.
I don't know who else has major projects out there, but the indication, I was up at RIDE on, excuse me, on Monday, meeting with the director of the construction group, and we're asking for a relatively small amount. And in most of it, if not all of it's health and safety related. So our request is small, health and safety related, and should be a priority.
We also had heard, sort of speculation or rumors, will the moratorium not sunset? Will the moratorium go on continually? And so this morning, John and I were at a sort of a RIDE regional accountability meeting, and he had an opportunity to ask some of the RIDE folks if there was any indication if that was going to happen, and they felt as if they were hearing rumors of two camps. Some are saying, oh no, absolutely this sunset will be lifted, and other folks were less sure of that sunset being lifted. We also, I forgot to say it last night, so if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to sort of sneak it in now. We have been invited by the Rhode Island Association of School Committees, as I'm sure they would extend their invitation to you all. On Saturday at Building 6 at Rhode Island College, they're offering a training session for school committee members and staff members on the Rhode Island Schoolhouse Report. And I know that Mr. O'Neill had asked a question about that quite recently. So the Schoolhouse Report took a look at every single school in the state and to see the shape, the condition, and really, I shouldn't say they took a look. They took our data that we had, and they wanted to specifically look at capacity so that I think they could plan as you're indicating, where will the requests be coming from in terms of schools that are overloaded with capacity in order to plan projects in the future? But also, what we're hearing is that the state might not be as amenable to grant project approval to communities that have excess space. And so that's something that's very much piquing our curiosity. We would certainly not want to be declined because they have identified us as not a community that's growing. Because I told you my overall plan is that we will grow very shortly.
Yeah, I was worried that, I heard that mention that they were looking at a lot of the population drops, and, but anyway, my other concern, going back, my other question was, I didn't know if the education funding formula with the few cities and towns like ourselves that are losing money every year, if that was gonna determine our position when it comes to the state approving various
Haven't
projects.
heard that.
I just didn't know if one was connected to the other.
We got an email either this morning or yesterday from Tim Duffy of RIASC that stated that there was good news regarding the governor's budget with regard to the funding formula. It looked likely that the funding formula would be supported, fully funded, if you will. In recent years, they've looked for an acceleration of the funding formula, unsure if that would happen. I don't know if it would put us in good stead if it did happen. We wouldn't want an acceleration of our decline of funding. But, so I haven't heard that, but I don't know if any, no. I'm getting nods of no, that it seems that wouldn't be a contributing factor.
The other thing I would add too is, Wright has indicated that if the moratorium were to continue, that they would request a small, what they call a small fund. They're estimating $70 million or so that they could approve based on the health and safety. So it would be likely that we would fall into that fund should the moratorium continue beyond July 1st.
I think it's of key importance to understand that if we're looking at beginning those improvements in 14-15, which is what the budget schedule shows, if we don't have the certifications in place and the approvals, then we're going to have to seriously look at that program, because on a $900,000 first year, you're talking at 35%, over $316,000 that would be reimbursed to the construction fund. So we've got to take a look at that. That does become a major concern. I think the other point I would make to you, Jim, is that the State Department of Education at this point operates similar to what you're doing tonight, is they're putting a capital budget together based on all of the requests that have come forward, and they're certifying which ones they're going to approve that can fit within the funding availability that they have for the project. So it does get into limiting projects to health and safety purposes. Whether or not the definitions of all of the projects that we've got targeted are in fact going to be considered such is still an open question. And that's why we've talked about trying to get the book finished so that we could at least get the Phase 1 and Phase 2 applications in place. We are there. However, at this point, it all is going to depend on what actions take place at RIDE.
Thank you.
Can I just ask Steve or Kristen, historically what has happened when you put in for, like, right now we're putting in for 903,000. Historically, have we gotten the full amount?
All bets are off at this point. This is a whole new procedure that's been instituted. One of the problems that was occurring was that school systems were deferring maintenance to such an extent that they would go in for total rehabilitation of buildings. Some of the urban schools are not at the 35% reimbursement rates. They'd be in reimbursement rates as high as 90%. So it became much more efficient in terms of local dollars to continually look for long-term borrowing dollars with the state reimbursing them for interest and principal at a 75, 85, or 90% rate, depending on where their community fit in terms of need. So once they started looking at the major escalation in the cost associated with the school housing aid program, they determined that they needed to really come up with a new procedures. what we're looking at here are new procedures that are requiring documentation for each of the projects so that the state knows that they're getting the best return on their investments. I don't disagree with what they're attempting to do. Certainly, I think it goes back to the argument of additional state control over local decision-making, but at the same time, in this case, it's decision-making where we're actually looking for their financial support. So I think that there is justification for them wanting to do more to define their due diligence, but the time sequencing may in fact create some difficulty for us as far as some of the projects that are necessary at this time.
I would agree. I would say that in, I think it was 98 or 99, we did major renovations to East Providence High School when I was the assistant superintendent there. That process was very seamless, not a lot of scrutiny. It was almost like rubber stamped, in my opinion. In my tenure in Situate, we had one project before the timeline of the 2007 change. That was, again, seamless. We practically rebuilt an entire elementary school. And then the Woonsocket School Department specifically, it was around the time where they were taking their one very large sort of facilities outdated middle school, and they created two sister middle schools a couple of streets apart and at 90% reimbursement. And then you saw sort of the media fly and the State Department. It was just on that cusp of the funding formula was coming up. I think it was 2 or 3 years later, and you sort of change, and that's when we got this wonderful gift of the necessities for school construction application. I remember going through it. We put a major addition on Situate High School, and I thought I'd never get out of the document. It was just a completely different process just 2 or 3 years later. And so the dollars didn't change in terms of the ask because we were very prepared, as I believe we are very prepared now with the facility study, with the prioritization, with certainly the combined experience of Bob and John and Steve to be able to look at these items, and our capital team prioritizing them. But it's a whole different ballgame compared to projects that were done prior to the change in regulation and application.
I have a question, and don't shoot the messenger, I'm just gonna ask.
Never shoot you.
Because I'm really naive at this. Based on the census tract information, the demographics that I read, enrollment has been declining.
Correct.
We see that it's been a shortfall in enrollment, and there are children that are homeschooled, or children that are at charter schools as well. But based on the numbers, where do you think that we need to be in the next, I mean, I'm an advocate for every single school that exists in town, believe me, I am. But how do you think that funding is gonna have to continue to be in effect for these schools when the enrollment is declining? And are you preparing for that as a school committee? That's a concern of mine.
So I want to make sure that I'm answering the right question. Yes, we are very much aware that enrollment is declining. Usually when that question comes up, it comes up in the time of budget, and sometimes it's a community member who says, well, you declined 60 students, then why aren't you dropping 3 more teachers? And so we try to remind folks that it doesn't come in nice little bundles, that sometimes we could be having one child Matunic kindergarten, another child Matunic 4th grade, and they're sprinkled in different grade levels and demographics throughout the community. And so prior to your joining the council, we had a community-based committee of citizens who were, staff members didn't serve on the committee, but we were there. Mr. Murray and Carol from your planning department lended their talents to the discussion. And we mapped out lots of different scenarios. This, as you probably know, the school committee really endorsed the community's feeling of supporting the neighborhood school model, and so no changes or closures or redistribution of youngsters was made at that time. It's a pretty steady trend, a trend that we're hoping to overturn with some new programs. As you saw this year, we brought back a bunch of youngsters. We may not have brought them back. I think that was discussed at the last meeting that we held, but they came back somewhere. Charter schools went down, and we seemed to have a positive intake at those appropriate grade levels. But we're always planning, taking a look at enrollment, strategizing, not to the formality of perhaps what you're looking for. We know where youngsters are moving in. We know that Peacedale Elementary School, for example, was historically four classrooms of every grade level, and now we've started then usually what happens is you go from, let's say, 3 or 4 of every grade level, and then sporadically you'll have one cohort year where you're not offering, a grade level. But when you start to see a trend continue of entering kindergartners coming in, and you're solidly running now 3 sections, this will be our first year at potentially running 3 kindergartens and 3 first grades, you're starting to see in pockets an enrollment decline. So right now for this year, we're seeing a small enrollment decline projected, because every time I commit to an enrollment decline at an elementary school, little ones appear on our doorstep on the very first day of school. So it looks like, down 1 section at Peacedale, down 1 section at Matunic, stable at Wakefield, stable at West Kingston for next year. That could change in 2 months. That's what I'm planning for now. I need to always have that data available to me so that we're constantly going through it. It's going to have an impact on, not only on budgets, but layoff lists. It's going to have an impact on reinstatements, rehires. We also take a very careful look at, if we ever need to, I know I'm going to search for the word, reorganize the what's it called? Redistricting. See, it's such a naughty word, it didn't even come quickly off my tongue. So we also look at that to say, I've lived through it in other communities where all of a sudden there was a heavy population in one part of town, and then that population shifts, and you really can't provide equitable services when there's overcrowding in one elementary school and undersubscription in another. We haven't seen a dramatic shift like that. We also have had the luxury of being able to offer to families the opportunity to change their school after certainly the residents of that neighborhood have been placed. If, let's say, you came and said, my daycare is at Wakefield School, although I live in Matunic, I would prefer to attend Wakefield School. We accept those on a case-by-case basis at the very end of August, and we do it only for 1 year based solely on enrollment and the parents' willingness to provide their own transportation. And so sometimes, even if you took a look at our enrollment snapshot by school, they might not be real, true demographic snapshots. You'd have to peel out the youngsters who are there by request. But certainly these are South Kingstown, residents.
Thank you. I
Certainly.
appreciate your answer. Thank you very much.
Kristen, the whole conversation begs the question, I'm sure it's considered by the school committee many times over the years, but we are talking about a 6-year plan, and at what point does the pupil population drop that you have to consider closing a school? Or is that something that we just hope never to think about? I mean, hopefully you're right, and, you'll start bringing in more children. But I mean, it has to be something that's always the second part of that question that Meg was asking, if not the first part. I know it's an awful,
I'm going to start, and then people are going to fill in. So that is one of the most unpleasant conversations
Right.
that you can bring up in a community of families. And so,
well, look at what they're going through in Warwick, right, with
I-
the closing of Warwick Veterans High School.
which has been delayed.
Right.
Right. So yes, it's a hard conversation to have with families. And so there are certain, tipping points. One tipping point would be the budget. When you run out of places, if you run out of places that you need to cut, then it's an area that will remain up to the school committee to decide in any given year. Additionally, if you saw a dramatic sort of unpredictable acceleration, and you're running very small class sizes, then it gets to a point that it would be irresponsible for me to not bring that to the attention of the school committee so that they could take a look at it. Our population, since we last looked at this, is not changed that dramatically that I'm assuming it's a new conversation, you know, so we haven't looked at it to date, but it is certainly something that in terms of, you know, fiscal responsibility and in terms of making certain that we're providing with the dollars that we have, the most attractive and equitable education that we can for our children, we always have to at least, you know, think about, you know, what their plans would be. And I'm going to let other folks have the mic.
So we had the reconfiguration committee a few years ago, and they went through, I think it was 20-something different scenarios for what may happen. And at that time, I think we didn't have the decline that maybe, I don't know, five or six scenarios could have worked at that point. So I've talked about this in the past. I think I talked about it here, where I would see potentially in the next year or two that we would do that process over again and revisit some of those things depending on what our population does. I think like Kristen said, at this point, it hasn't been a tipping point to have us do that, but I think certainly all of us are aware that that conversation is coming. Right. So I think what happened, you know, 4 years ago or whatever, it felt very quick and very reactive, and I think the process was slowed down a little bit in order to let the community kind of weigh in to the conversation and what their values were and what we wanted as a town. So I think if we can be a little bit more proactive the next go around, I think maybe we can come up with a solution, but we'll have to see. It's a hard conversation.
No, it's a very hard conversation, Reza, and you know, I appreciate what you're saying. I mean, it did seem like we just went through all this a couple of years ago, and you know, we're back.
Well, what happens, I think,
this could be something on the forefront, and we don't want it to just like
come at us again.
Take everybody by surprise.
Yes,
you know?
agreed. Yep, we agree.
Press forward the button. There you go.
Okay, all right. I apologize because last meeting I did not have my microphone on, so. But I just want to share my perspective from, I was a community member at that time of that process, and, you know, so maybe just to share a concern of how that process went, and, you know, hopefully it wouldn't happen again, but just it was a missed opportunity. Basically, it was decided that we kind of set aside a year to have a conversation, and then at the school committee at that time, for whatever reason, I still don't understand, it still hasn't been explained to me, that they made the decision in a matter of, you know, 12 to 16 weeks. And so to me, as I hear it being discussed tonight, and this was talked about last year too, you know, very lately, you know, I'm not sure, and it is very emotional. And it does pull people in. I mean, you know, and I actually appreciate, Meg, you know, you bringing it forward, because it is, you know, can kind of become the elephant in the room, so to speak. And so really what should have happened at that time, and I know we can't change the past, but, you know, I think that so much of the discussion, school discussions, are about accountability, and that's part of why I ran. So, you know, I just want to set up some accountability that really what should have happened at that time was, okay, if population declines, so we don't have to do it twice. I mean, can you imagine having to go through this process again in another couple of years? It's terrible. So what they should have done is, if enrollments declined, come up with whatever that number is. We had all these talented people that got pulled together, and then they didn't even come up to look down the road, okay, well, what are we going to do if it drops another 200 or 300? Where is that point? And then the piece that I still, you know, it boggles my mind is that then, you know, they present this information to you at the town council, and then they changed what the plan was that the community came up with, and they reopened South Road as a preschool. So I just, you know, I think the accountability is important. And so I just want to bring this piece out because it is kind of the elephant in the room, and it really was an opportunity lost by the school committee serving at that time to not be a little more looking forward with this.
I just have to say for all of us, I mean, because of the economic times we're living in, we've had to plan year by year instead of, we haven't had the luxury of all of this, where are we going from here, which we're trying to do, but it's very difficult without knowing where the money's coming from and with the state aid being cut back. So, I mean, I think for all of us, it's been a very difficult road to travel, and it's continuing to be. So, go ahead, Rachel.
I just want to say, the plan that was put forward was to move the preschool, it was to move the preschool out of Hazard. That was the plan that came through from RAC. And it was at that point to move the preschool into the Peacedale Elementary School and then to distribute those students around to the remaining elementary schools. At that time, what happened was the school committee chose to take part of that recommendation and move the children out of South Road because there were a lot of different variables that they didn't belong in that building. But I wanted to say that in putting that preschool in South Road School, I believe that we've recovered the housing aid, correct?
We are on schedule to recover,
So with Peacedale, if those students had gone to Peacedale, then we wouldn't have been able to resubmit for the 35% housing aid at South Road School. So it actually enabled us to get some money back.
So under that logic, I don't think we would ever close a school.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, sometimes, I've lived in places not here in Rhode Island that schools have been closed. It's not easy. But when the numbers come up and kind of smack you in the face, you have to make hard choices. And sometimes those choices aren't easy. So we'll see what the future will out. I mean, the future we'll see. I'm just looking at these things. We're looking at from 2007 to 2018, there's a 500, minus 500 students. And I'm not saying and say, oh, I want to have more, more students. The economy's lousy, the housing economy's lousy. There aren't a lot of jobs, there's high unemployment in South Kingstown, people having fewer children. I just don't see where all these students are coming from. I mean, to me, every not everyone, but the inner city, they might be growing, but not down in the suburbs. So I think you have to plan for these things and not have the furor that happens if my neighborhood school closes. And sometimes that might have to happen. It's unfortunate, but that might have to happen at some point.
Go ahead, Scott.
I guess this is clearly a challenging issue. It's not an issue that hasn't been discussed. We've gone through a number of redistrictings over the years. And with regard to the enrollment process, I understand the attractiveness of coming up with some formula that will automatically trigger the closing of a school. I disagree with Jonathan about how to do that. I really think that it's much more effective to continue to look at the situation and to allow the community that is present at the time to weigh into that process, not a community that existed 5 years ago that developed some formula. Clearly we need to stay on top of enrollment. We need to look at charter enrollment and whether we are retaining an increasing percentage of the students from South Kingstown. But I'm much more interested in this being a current conversation that involves current community members, not developing a formula that will trigger something 5 years from now or 7 years from now. I think that would be a mistake. And frankly, I would expect if we had developed that, as Jonathan argues, and that got triggered, I would expect that the community would say, wait a second, let's have a conversation about where we are today rather than being driven by something before. I don't think that an opportunity was lost. It was a difficult conversation. It involved a lot of people. And where we have ended up, I think, frankly, is a pretty good place.
I have to agree with you, Scott. I think we did end up in a good place. And it did look for a while there, it was going to be very difficult. So, hey, we rode out the storm, right?
I was just saying, it's like, my point of view is just to keep an eye on the future. Is to keep an eye on the future.
So Maureen is,
Yeah.
I don't want to repeat what Ms. Mosher and Mr. Miller have said. I do want to let you know that I do agree with them. But I think the bigger point here is, and to acknowledge Mr. Donnelly's comment right now, is keeping an eye on the future, but being very thoughtful about the process and not being reckless and not having, not missing the opportunity to have the conversations about it with the direction of the superintendent in terms of what the situation really looks like out there. So thank you.
I'm not trying to suggest that to have a plan 3 years ago to make a definite, you know, oh, in 2018 or something, that this is what would happen. But we set aside all this time as a community, a school committee, set aside all this time to investigate this, brought in community members, and they didn't really look down the road. So now the question comes up, and really the conversation is, well, yeah, I mean, we're aware of it, but as far as the school board, I mean, I don't know what they're doing in administrative meetings, okay, so maybe they've had this conversation, but as far as the school board, we don't know what that proposal would be or when those numbers would come to be. So to me, it feels like we're kind of flying blind, and I feel for the town council members asking the question. And whereas if in that time when those planning meetings were happening, if they had set up some general parameters, then there would be some idea of what we're talking about and what's being looked at. And I think that the town council members would have much more information, that have a better sense of some of the options. So right now, it's kind of like, well, we'll look at it, but there's no real options. And so to me, I think we're kind of doing a disservice. We did a disservice to ourselves, to the school committee at that time, the school district, to town council and the community in general, to not even have that discussion.
A major component that is missing from this conversation right now is the conversation about enrollment, and as Scott talked about, where kids live at that moment in time. And so enrollment data, as it's very frustrating to us, and I know Mr. O'Neill, we've spoken about this in the past, that an October 1 snapshot might not be what the enrollment looks like at the end of that school year, and it might be significantly changed. And so if you can imagine that, I'll say 3 or 4 years ago, because that's certainly when the conversation happened, those kids are now, they're in the middle school. And so there might not be even homes with families occupied in that particular plat, in that particular neighborhood anymore. We've certainly seen, I know in my neighborhood, all the kids seem to be now high school age and above, and then shortly thereafter there'll be little ones running around again. And so it seems plausible to be able to identify, if this happens, then this is what we'll do. But, John and I spent days here with Carol in your office with all of her land maps of where there's a kindergartner, where's the fourth grader, where's the third grader, in every single house. It was very time-consuming, very specific, very detailed-oriented conversation. That conversation changes in any given year. And so if you were to ask me to do that work last January, and then you asked me to bring it forward, I would need to do that detail work again this January to be able to to predict a model for you. And the only other piece that I would say is that the RAC committee, having gone to, I think, between John and I, every meeting, there's a finite number of options if you're not going to build a facility, and they even did take a look at some of those options. We looked at deeds of properties, and if we closed a building and made it an elderly care facility, could that happen? And as you know, many of the schools were deeded to the town to only be used as a school. So we got very, very, very deep into the work. Those folks took it very seriously, and so there still remains those finite number of options. So if I think there were 27 options. I would be hard-pressed to think of a 28. So I know how the community felt, the values of the community surrounding neighborhood schools at the time was the big concept. I don't know that concept has changed. I think that the enrollment has certainly changed. And so if a tipping point occurred in the future and we were asked to revisit that process, I would think that the committee would take a look at the most viable options that were determined from that previous committee, because they did do so much of that foundation work.
Discussion, because I've been talking about populations and schools for a long time. But my biggest worry is that I wish you all could tell me that these decisions will be left to us, the school committee and the town council, and not the state in the future. That's my worry. And it should be all your worries, because I'm looking at more and more states looking at single payer, this, that, and I think that should be the topic of conversation. Anyway, just my thoughts, but I mean, people move here, they depend on us, we're making decisions, but I hate to have it all taken out of our hands, and that's my worry.
Steve?
I want to finish where, in terms of talking about the financing plan. Kristen's gone through the projects, but I want to provide and make sure that people are aware of how we're looking to finance a $6.5 million plan with only $5 million in bonds. So the first page that I've got up on the board at this point, you see the school bonding element. It shows it the $5 million on that first line. The projects that are listed below that as non-bonding projects are projects that are going to require funding through the school fund's undesignated fund balance and monies that will come in from the South Road Reserve. The reason those projects is listed as non-bond in most cases is because they do not have a 20-year life associated with them, which would be the life of the bond. And the first year, or 14, 15 year, is something that we've talked about for the last 3 years with the school committee in terms of using the undesignated fund balance as a means of jump-starting the capital improvements on the major things that are necessary, particularly at the high school. So you can see that there's $903,000 that is planned for the 14-15 year that would come out of fund balance. The 170 in the 15-16 year for West Kingston parking repaving is shown at 170. The same holds true with the 36,000 for carpeting with the admin building and the 150 for Curtis Corner repaving out in the year 1920. All of these projects are elective projects. They may be done, they may not be done within that schedule. It will depend on what the financial health is that's associated with the unassigned fund balance that's available within the general fund as we get to those years. The $274,000 that's shown for South Road roof, that would come out of the reserve fund that the town maintains from all of the lease interests that were paid during the time that that building was under lease arrangement. Right now, there's about, I think it's about $401,000 that's available there. Of that sum, there's another $50,000 roughly, I think it's $43,000 to be exact, in monies that would be required to pay future debt service associated with the bonds that are outstanding on the South Road roof. And so that would give a net at that building of about $87,000 once that work were done. So if you look at it, you've got $5 million in bonds, the $903,000, that would be coming out of school fund balance, another $356 that may come out of school fund balance or out of the South Road Reserve Fund, that $274,000. And that's how you get to the $6,533,000 that would be expended over that 6-year term of the program. The second page in the handout looks to address school fund balance. We can call it a lot of different things. We can call it undesignated, we can call it unassigned, we can call it committed. But essentially, the fund balance of the school unrestricted fund was $3,176,000 for the audit that was just completed for June 30 of 2013. The school department has encumbrances or commitments for the computer software that they're partnering with the town on of $350,000. That will come from that fund balance. Encumbrances outstanding as of June 30th was another $195,000. And the $535,000, which goes to fund the 13-14 year budget. There's also the $903,000 that we just talked about that would be for the 14-15 year projects. That means that if there's no fund balance increase associated with surplus positions for the 2013-14 year, the fund balance in the next audit on June 30 of 14 would stand at about $1.2 million. Now, if there's any surplus for the current year come June 30th, that will add to that $1.2 million value. So what I want to demonstrate is that we've got the financial capability within that fund to be able to drive those capital projects with that $903,000. And we also anticipate that the repaving jobs as well as the carpeting proposal in future years, that there should be adequate funds within fund balance to be able to address that without looking at the bonding program itself. I also wanted to mention that if in fact they receive the proper certifications for the 14-15 year and spend the $903,000, then they're going to get $316,050 or 35% of that $903,000 back from the state. That won't go to the school fund balance. It would go directly into the construction fund for availability. So that $356,000 we've talked about for future really nets out to about $40,000 if the $316,000 comes in from the reimbursement. We will have to revisit whether that 903 gets done in 14-15, depending on what happens with the moratorium or with the certifications, because we certainly don't want to drop $300,000 if a delay of a year may in fact allow us to obtain those dollars. So this is, each year we've talked with the school committee and I said, I can put this type of schedule together, but you first need to show me what the projects are. We've got the projects now defined. We've got the phasing going up to the state, and this is a documentation of the financial capability to be able to do it from school fund and not hurt the school fund in terms of your ability to look to the 14-15 year on what undesignated funds being forwarded to that year will be. Now, I know the superintendent's just given you the budget in recent days, and I'm sure your revenue statement, you'll see that there's a proposal for, I think it's about $235,000 that would be committed. We're going to have to take a look at that on whether that's a low number, a high number, or what that number should be as we go forward, but fully recognizing that these encumbrances or reserves should be set up to be able to drive those capital expenditures. The next thing that I wanted to make sure the school committee was aware of is that In the town's capital improvement program, that which I've presented to the council for consideration is to try to provide definitive dates on bringing forward the community recreation center. What we're looking at is that if that community recreation center becomes a viable project, and I say becomes a viable project because at this point, there's $3.1 million in bonding authorization available for that project. There's an additional $1 million in bonding that's going to be necessary, and if the council approves, will go on the ballot along with the school bonds for consideration in November of 2014 with the next general election. If in fact those bonds are approved and council brings that forward project as part of the capital improvement program, we would be looking at constructing a phase one 25,000 square foot building in close proximity to the senior center on the Savio property that we acquired. Within the documentation in my overall capital improvement program is this slide. What this shows is that there's space available for potentially 2 buildings. What we wanted to do when we purchased the Savio property is, one, to provide place for schools, recreation space, and to try to centralize activities for maintenance purposes and for supervision purposes. So what we're looking at is that the proposal would be to be able to site one of potentially 2 buildings on a master plan that would provide for a 25,000 square foot building that would house an area that could be used for all types of sports programs, from basketball, softball, to soccer, to indoor tennis, volleyball, any of the sport activities that currently are vying for space in any of the recreational buildings or the town buildings. There's a narrative that's written up in the capital budget that talks about the fact that for about 8 months of the year, most of our indoor gym space is occupied by recreation leagues for kids. And what it does is it takes away opportunities for other interest groups that are looking for gym space. So what we're looking at is to be able to create additional indoor play space for the community, not just for kids, but certainly it would be inclusive of the children, but also for other age groups which right now are shut out of that gym space. The soccer field that's shown on this property is a soccer field that when we negotiated the acquisition of the Savio property, Monsignor Clark and Prout, through the diocese, were committing that they would build the soccer field provided the town provided the parking at a future date. The initial contract that we have with them allowed for the construction within a 5-year term. We've extended that because we haven't been in a position to put forward the parking, and they haven't been in a position to move forward with that soccer field or lacrosse field, whatever it may be. Both from a funding standpoint, we weren't prepared to move forward unless we were doing the parking lot in conjunction with the community recreation center. So we wanted to bring that forward because the council's going to have to make decisions as to what items go to referendum. At this point, the recommendation to the council would be to ask General Assembly approval to put the $6 million that's shown on the bottom of the sheet before voters on at the November election. The potential is that the East Matunic Beach bypass will not go to the voters. It may be one that the council authorizes under its 3% available bonding capability without seeking to have voter approval on it. But the other two, the $4 million for the school purposes and the $1 million for the rec center, would be recommended for ballot items, and the council will have to make that decision. I thought it was important to make sure that the school committee was aware of this project because it's certainly a project that would provide additional play space and organized sport activity space going forward. It would be, it would not supplant, but rather expand the opportunity for indoor recreation or indoor sport activities as we go forward. I also wanted to make it clear that one of the things that we've attempted to do is to get our bonded indebtedness down. We had, at the time that we built the Broad Rock School, we were up to about $40 million. We're now down in the area of about $16.5 million. Even with integrating that $11.5 million, of which $5 million would be school associated, we would not see our bond indebtedness increase over $20 million. In addition to that, we wouldn't see the debt service being more than 4.5% of our tax levy. So we're at a proper time to be able to start making meaningful improvements in our facilities, and we can do it within, I think, the community's ability to pay and willingness to pay, provided those bonds are authorized in the November general election. The last item is just simply going to, I think, some of the discussions that have been had this evening, is where are we going with the enrollments? And the enrollments continue to decline. That's no secret to anybody. But I think that the real concern is the issue of capacity. Because as we go forward within this state housing aid program, we're seeing more and more definition to what is the state's definition going to be for capacity in terms of continued work on active school buildings. So the projected period there is based on what the last study that was done for the school department in January of last year by the New England, what's the group name? By that group. So these aren't my numbers. They're not Kristen's numbers. They're an outside consultant that is looking at birth rates, housing construction, and really the demographics of the community in forecasting where they see enrollments going. And in fact, this year we're looking at enrollment declines of around 49 students, even though we're picking up probably 25 additional pre-Ks that are half-day students. So the numbers that we've seen in the past with losses in the 70s to 80 student range will continue to be a concern as we go forward. Unless we see major changes in new housing construction that is going to be housing that would see a good deal of children in it. Most of our housing that we're seeing of recent has been either senior housing or condominiums of 2 bedrooms or less. So we're not seeing the housing type that has demand promoting additional enrollment changes from what we've seen over the last several years. So that's just a synopsis of where we are. But I think what I really wanted to be able to say is that the plan that's been put forward is credible from a programmatic standpoint as well as a financial standpoint for it being able to be accomplished within an ability to pay for the community. I'd answer any questions anybody has.
I just wanted to ask a little bit about the community gym. So in your plans for that, are you working with our athletic director to determine the need for some of the activities that we're lacking in the schools or unable to provide because of a lack of space?
Yes, I think that we would be looking at, the athletic directors would be looking at the rec leagues that are out there and
Sure.
and attempting to get a defined need statement and a community dialogue, because this is a major project.
Yeah.
It's also a major concern because people have to look at this and say, well, are you building something that's going to be vacant for several hours of the day until school's open? Or is this a program that's going to provide other activities during the daytime hours for the general community? And how's that going to be used? At this point, the demand has really been coming up through the recreation community.
Right, basketball, I know in particular is,
And that's, that's where we've been seeing it. Whether the school sports want to move to a different location,
I'm talking about something that we might even not have at all, for example, an indoor track, or, as you referenced, volleyball. They don't, the
any
kids.
of those things could be incorporated into the facility based on the needs assessment being conducted. And that should be, if the council votes to put this to referendum, then I think that what we're going to do is to get a committee going of different groups
Mhm.
that would define what it is that we're really trying to accomplish.
Yep.
I mean, the key here is that, I've had people say to me, well, gee, why don't we knock down the existing high school gym and put a new gym up? Well, we could spend $5 million doing that, but if we're not increasing the square footage that we have for those activities, we're not accomplishing anything, we're supplanting the existing space.
Right,
So we've got to look at, is there a need for the space? And I think that there's been enough groups that are pushing to say
oh,
that
certainly,
there is.
yeah.
The question is, can we afford it? And if we do put it in, how are we going to manage it after the fact? Because one of the concerns I've expressed to the council is that certainly from a capital perspective, the town will be able to incorporate it into the debt structure. The town will be able to have our debt, as I said, staying relatively low. The real question would be, where does the dollars come from to operate and supervise a facility of this nature?
Thank you.
And that's something else that has to be looked at, because you have to look at what revenue streams are going to be available to you. So it's a program that we're hearing people say, yeah, we want. It's a program that I can say to them, yeah, we can put the brick and mortar in place, but the more important question is, what type of a multi-generational uses are possible there, and what type of a floor plan would you need? Are you talking about full locker rooms to be able to have, the high school basketball program there for their home games? Are you talking about, the volleyball locations? Are you talking about indoor tennis? Are you talking about any of those different activities? Is there a way of having a walking track within that type of a building for certain portions of the day? With the seniors next door, we would like to see programs that would benefit them as well. The location is key to us, because we believe that the location provides the walking trails that, A, would be able to get you to Commons, B, would be able to get you to Old Mountain Field. So you don't have to get on any town road to be able to go from Old Mountain Field to Broad Rock School or to the Commons. So this provides a reason why we're looking for, in addition to trying to develop things at one location and making it a municipal center, to why we think if there is going to be that type of a facility, it should be constructed at that location.
I'll just keep my comments brief, but I'll just say it this way: if you build it, they will come.
That's a good one.
And that's how I feel about it. I know there are some people that are opposed to having it there. It's a safe location, and as you pointed out the other night, Steve, we don't want to interfere with the private industries that are somewhat in this, type of work, of course, but I think it's extremely viable for the town. And I honestly, if you build it, they will come. That's all I have to say.
And when you say that, I'll say the ball's in your court.
So I don't know, so I'll bring forward, and Meg, you may not know, or Paul, you may not know, or Michelle, but when the RAC conversation, at one point, they talked about, it was brought forward, I think Mr. O'Neill had strong interest in this. I know that Mrs. Mosier had strong interest in this. This was something I wanted explored, was that maybe that the Curtis Corner School would end up closing. There'd be some different configuration. And I guess, supposedly, it wouldn't work at this point, maybe if the enrollment went down, maybe it would work. And it was talked about, and there would seem to be some interest in exploring having the community recreation center at the Curtis Corner site, which also ties in very nicely with many of the recreational facilities. And I actually think that when you look at some of the demographics and with the bike path, that really could be a more desirable site. And so I think that that's part of the conversation, that where a year was set aside, and then for whatever reason, I guess I'll just say, it was political reasons, in my opinion, they set it up to have a 12 to 16-week time frame discussion, and so that wasn't looked at. So now here, enrollment is still going down. There could be another configuration, we don't know, and now we're talking about making a major investment into a new facility, which maybe the community would like to see at Curtis Corner. Maybe they want to see it at Broad Rock, I don't know. But basically now decisions, this is what has been frustrating to me the last few years, it keeps going year to year to year. And when they set up that RAC group, that was supposed to get it off of the year-to-year schedule. Let's look at what our needs are going to be for 3 or 5 years. And we can take little comments and say, well, we need to decide with the people that are here today, not 5 years ago. But we've known about this recreation center. A bond was passed in 2004 or something. So I mean, it's something that's been talked about, and just nobody ever wants to have the discussion where we say, let's really look down the road. And so now here we are. We might be moving this forward, and the community hasn't had a chance to weigh in and really look at all the different options. So that's one thing.
That's the first I ever heard about putting this at Curtis Corner Middle School.
But
I
maybe
don't
that-
think that was ever the intent of the town council, let's put it that way. That was never even a consideration, so,
I don't know if that
That was
predates
not
you,
on-
but I know that,
for us.
I know
And I
Mr.
still
yeah.
don't see it as a real viable option. I mean, what would you do with the rest of the school, even if you're using the gym? What are you going to do with the rest of it, just leave it?
When
Where you could put the whole thing to a different use, possibly. I don't even want to really get into that conversation, but I don't think that that was ever a consideration from our point of view. So,
I mean, that's not my recollection, and I'd be curious to know what Mr. O'Neill's recollection is.
do you remember ever talking about putting a community gym in the
Not
Curtis
the
Corner
co-
Middle
Not
School?
the community gym, no. It was always a question if the population dropped a whole lot further, 200-300 more students, we might have to consider consolidation of the middle schools or even reopening South Road. That was always a conversation, but we had such a deal, and we frankly really paid for, without any cost to the taxpayer, for the Dominic Savio property, if I'm correct on that. Close?
I will say, the two projects have, the issue of what school, if any, was going to close, has always been out there as long as this project for the last 6 years.
Yeah.
Those two were never joined together.
No.
This is the first that somebody's trying to join the recreation facility with the closing of the school. I've never heard that before.
No.
There's certainly been discussions, and people have said, gee, we could close Curtis Corner and move the kids to Broad Rock. But why that ties into the recreation center is beyond me.
Yeah. And this doesn't tie into Broad Rock School. This is a community recreation center. It's in proximity to the Broad Rock School, but it's not part of Broad Rock School.
No,
Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it really was a question of Curtis Corner being a nice site where you have the track, it backs you got all the fields between Curtis Corner and South Road. And so that was part of the conversation. I'll see if I can go through my notes and bring it to one of the next meetings.
Anything else?
I did just have a separate topic, and maybe this can be brought at actually I have two other things, but, I'm kind of under the impression that over the last 10 to 20 years, developers have wanted to build housing that would be okay for families, and that there have been rules or regulations or encouragement or incentives that senior housing has been more desirable. I think that was part of the growth management plan. And at that time where population growth, student growth was going up so quickly, it made sense. So I'm not being critical of that thought process. But it seems like it's been pretty effective, and maybe the conversation needs to happen of, if those policies are in place, do they need to be altered so that now some of this housing is not being built just for 55 and older? Do we need housing built that would be okay for families? And I know there's been developers in recent years that, especially with this down economy, which now we're to some extent we're finally starting to come out of, but some of the projects that exist that were built and they couldn't sell them, they investigated whether or not they could be changed from being 55 and older into units that could have families. And so, I mean, that's just something that I'm aware of through my profession. I'm not especially familiar, so I'm happy to plead my ignorance, but I am aware of that on some level, basically through my profession and following some of the town planning. And so, as we talk about enrollments, maybe the town needs to look at having more units for families being able to be built.
Steve, what you want to? I mean, I
would
think it's
just
a
say
trend. It's been a trend with builders. I'm not necessarily sure that we've encouraged it one way or the other, but you would know.
I think that, well, I just totally disagree with what's been said. Because the way I see it is that in the 80s and the 90s, we saw a great deal of growth and development in 3 to 4 bedroom houses. Why? Because there was land available. It was cheap enough for somebody to be able to put a house that was affordable to somebody looking as a first home buyer. As we got into the major inflation in the value of housing in the community, it became impossible for those houses to be affordable for a first-time home buyer. So what we saw is that people were buying, it was either their second home, if they could afford a $400,000 or a $500,000 home. There were not the $250,000 homes. What we also saw was there was no condominiums built in South Kingstown in the 80s and the 90s. For the most part, it was all single-family development that occurred. The demographics changed. The cost of real estate increased. The cost of land skyrocketed because there was less and less land available for development. I don't think that there was really a promotion for plus 65. I think that the market found that there was a demand for that type of housing, and they went to that in terms of construction. I don't see that there was anything that was trying to prevent first-time home buyers in South Kingstown, other than the fact that there was a scarcity of land that somebody could support building a house and selling it for a reasonable price that a first-time home buyer could afford. And I think that's been a great deal of the problem. There was a development that was an affordable unit development that they did ask to make that into single family, but what they were looking for was a density change. I don't remember the detail that went before the planning board. I certainly can get that for the council. But it's not a case where anybody on the planning board was attempting to prevent families from moving into South Kingstown.
I think I'd agree, Steve. Markets have a tendency to determine exactly what happened, and you had a state that was running deficits. Population decreases with families, no new jobs for the flow of people to move out, so their kids graduated, and a huge demand for folks. As Steve mentioned, in the 80s, 90s, everyone built 2 stories. Folks needed 1 story, so the condominiums came into play, single family, and I think the market will always determine in the future where we're going to go. There was no effort on the part of zoning or planning to ever diminish or accelerate one type of housing or the other. And I take a look at the state right now. I'm worried about deficits. I'm worried about the gambling in Massachusetts. I'm really in a small panic here. Where we're going to find the dollars? It's a difficult situation coming up, but markets always win out, and the developers did very well the last 12 years going to senior housing, and, oh,
No, I have to agree with Steve and Jim. I don't think we've ever been discouraging families. If anything, the community is so positive towards families. I mean, everything we've been talking about tonight is to make family, you know, to give a good life to kids and families. And, you know, it's the baby boomers, which many of us are part of, are now, you know,
And now
we're the
empty
major
empty
part of the
nesters
population.
looking to downsize.
So, I mean, that's more of a driving force than anybody here saying, don't let families in. I mean, God, we are welcoming of families. We're trying to figure out how to get more kids in the school, so, you know, more parks and recreations, walkable, you know, bike paths. That's got family written all over it. So,
in the last census, since you know I love numbers, except for Providence, the other 4 counties in Rhode Island, the last 5 years have had more deaths than live births. So if that doesn't tell you what's happening in the state, it's just not something.
Great note to finish on.
God,
Doom and gloom.
Way to go, Jim.
I'm sorry, but we just, at the end of the meeting in December that we had here, we talked about, you know, I brought up educator, evaluator, and, you know, unfunded mandates and like that. And Dr. Mega, you know, seemed like he was building off of or sharing some of my concerns of the direction of education. And I thought I heard some of that, you know, we need to schedule a meeting with the legislators to discuss some of these things as the total group. So just where, you know, it's been a few weeks have gone by, I just wanted to hope that there's things in the works or about to be in the works to maybe get such a session scheduled. I think it would be very beneficial, and I tend to see more encouragement from the town council on those issues than I see from the school committee, so I just want to bring that up here.
Actually, I don't think there's a meeting date set, but we met Saturday, and it was a discussion, and we talked to Spencer Dickinson, and one of the things that he talked about when we brought up some educational issues was that he would like all of us to get together, and he said he would be on the forefront of meeting with all of us. So I think we need to have, I guess, Ella, when she comes back, solidify a date to make sure we're all available. But we definitely talked about getting everybody together. So you're welcome.
and I know you guys already met with the legislature, right? So you obviously have prioritized your list as to what you need from the General Assembly. And I think last year we did some joint resolutions that I think were pretty effective, and we should probably follow the course that works and do that again. So if we know what your agenda is, what your priority list is, that would help if we're going to have a joint session with the legislature. I thought we were just meeting the council with the legislature this next time, but we haven't set a date yet.
That's correct.
Yeah, but I mean, we certainly, if we had your priorities, that would help us to mention that to them, because I know you've already spent a whole night with them.
Michelle, you were very instrumental the other day in that, when you talked with the meetings.
Go ahead, Maureen.
Well, I just want you to know that the superintendent, and I was copied on this, has already had a conversation with Mrs. Whaley in terms of the priority, so that communication has already been started.
Oh, okay.
Great, perfect.
Well, it was before the legislators came, that email?
No. I think she was talking about the Washington Community Planning Council when she was talking to you on that, not necessarily what we
Well, all I
would
can
do
tell you is
here.
that we shared the priorities that had been discussed at the school committee meeting in December,
Mm.
so that you know.
I can resend it.
Yeah, well, I think part of the concern is, you know, was 5 days before Christmas.
Yeah.
So I thought at the end of the meeting, I'll have to go look at the video again, but I thought at the end of the meeting, the reference was town council, school committee, and legislators. You know, a lot of the unfunded mandates really relate to the schools, not so much the town. And so I think it would be beneficial for the school committee and school administrators to be here to be part of that conversation. And I thought that that was the reference that I heard coming from the town council.
I'm concerned here, because Steve, the budget's got to be, what, February 15th from the school department? We never have any time for this. I would have liked to have had the representatives just free of what's going on up there since they started their sessions. I'm upset that I didn't know about this meeting, because I would have liked to have been at that meeting, because we never get more than 2 of our 5 or 6 legislators at our meeting here, and the more we can hit on them. So I'm really disturbed that I was not at that meeting with Mrs. Whaley. I would like to at least have information from that meeting, so I had more ammunition, more things to talk about.
You have come in the past, Jim, and it's always the December meeting. We have typically one meeting in December. This year, we had a snowstorm that evening, so we only had 2 representatives that were, one senator, one representative that was able to attend. And we do archive, as you do, the videos, so you certainly can take a look at it in that regard.
Conversation, though, that you had with Mrs. Whaley, I just haven't seen any notes from that or any.
There was no conversation, it was an email. She had asked about the priorities, and that was shared. That was the only thing I was addressing.
That must have been shared with Ella, because I didn't get anything. I know I didn't.
Well, we'll ask her for it.
Yep.
But I just hate every year we're going through this rush. You know, we can't think, we don't have time to say, my gosh, I heard Tony Mega say, future of education, we're going the wrong direction. I want that conversation. I want it in front of our reps and the others here.
So why not in March or whenever this is, March, April
March,
is
so
scheduled?
after we have to go through this routine every year.
But these issues aren't going away, so even if there's no relief this year, to have the
Certainly let you all know when we schedule it, if you are so inclined to attend, and certainly would encourage any conversation. So why don't we haven't even begun to schedule it yet, but we did discuss it at Monday night's meeting. And we will,
And, and just especially as we only did have 2 legislators at our meeting, 5 days before Christmas. So in March, if there is more legislators, to me, it should be inclusive of the schools. It's the biggest part of the town budget. To me, it's kind of a no-brainer.
I can simply say to you that I know that I touched on, with no voice, mind you, so you might not have gotten it, but I know that I touched on the major topics that we talked about.
Right.
We shared the Transportation Committee's piece with the bus monitors, and so that would have an impact on the bus monitor situation. We talked about group home aid, which we also discussed with you at the December meeting. We talked about park readiness, which we also discussed with you.
Yeah.
We talked about the funding formula, which we continually have discussions on. Those were the major priorities of the school committee. They sent a letter to the legislators, letting them know ahead of time so that they could be prepared to speak on those matters, and they certainly brought some other updates. It's a very robust conversation, but those remain the topics.
Okay,
I can
great.
resend you those topics, but there's also a link.
good. Okay. Should I open this up to the public, or anybody from the public like to take the podium?
The entire public road.
Yeah.
The entire public.
100% of the public's here. Keith Forhaven. I'd like to just share what I'm hearing sitting out here and see if I can bring a different perspective for you. The town council has suggested that with a drop in enrollment, a school might need to be closed. I think that's reasonable, and I think that's a prediction that may come true. What hasn't been mentioned in the conversation is the role that charter schools play in this. And I've been crunching some numbers. It's been an interest of mine lately. And the last time we closed a school, South Road Charter School enrollment went up. And with each student that goes to charter schools, that's $17,000 out of the school's budget. Just with some loose numbers, an an elementary school is about $675,000 in savings, and it's about 250 students. If we were to close a school and charter school enrollment were to increase, if 40 students were to go to the charter schools, it would be a zero-sum gain. And my concern with that is we're going to close a school in an effort to save money, and maybe we don't end up saving money. And the reason I suggest that charter school enrollment might increase is, being a parent and having conversations with parents, a big deal to students, or excuse me, a big deal to parents is class size. So if there was a drop in enrollment sufficient enough to close a school without affecting classroom size, I think that would be a very reasonable and prudent approach. But to close a school at the risk of increasing class sizes, I'm concerned that we're not going to reap the savings that we're pursuing. And when Mr. O'Neill had made mention of losing control and decisions being made up at Providence and not here, there's no elected official who has any influence over the charter schools. Not like our school system, where these are all elected officials. The charter school has no elected officials governing them. And that's our tax dollars that are being removed from our governance and being placed in there. And when they have class sizes on the magnitude of 15, and our classroom sizes, which I think are pretty reasonable at high teens, once you shift that ratio, believe me, people are paying attention. And my concern is when you had mentioned looking forward, Mr. Donnelly, I think that was really prudent, and that's a really sound way to approach this. So I'm very pleased with the conversation that I'm hearing, that it is being looking into the future. But that's one variable that hasn't come up in the conversation yet, and it may be the variable, if it's not discussed, if it's not factored into our decisions, may render a zero-sum gain. And the one thing I would add to that, and perhaps you're aware of it, perhaps you're not, is as we ask our citizens to pay more in taxes to support our school, now that the state's removed our funding, with each dollar that comes out of the taxpayer's pocket and goes to the school system, as a student goes to the charter school, that dollar goes with them too, on average. And the point I'm making is, as we continue to increase our taxes in an effort to maintain our school system, that will be reflected as a raise to the charter schools. So prior to pursuing closing a school, I'd quietly and respectfully ask, we have to go to RIDE, we need to get hold of our legislators, have them rejigger that formula, because mathematically it is definitely detrimental to this community in allowing us the resources to actually pursue solving this financial crisis. There's something up at RIDE that doesn't care for us, and I'm not really sure what it is or why.
I'm just, if I recall, our enrollment from South Kingstown from charter schools decreased this past year.
Right.
Yeah, so it decreased. It didn't increase, it decreased.
That is my point. We've put in all-day K, we've pursued pre-K. These are all financial incentives that are reaping us more students and making us more attractive and charter schools less attractive. Once you close a school, it is not going to be attractive to go, gee, I can send my kid to a class that has 15 kids, or I can send them to a class that's got 24.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I do remember in the charter schools, although their testing scores did go up this past year, their scores, which I was reading, were subpar to what they were at the public schools. Am I wrong on that?
It really depends on the charter school. And so some of the charter schools,
Actually, I was looking at Kingston Hill Academy.
Well, and it depends on the year. And so in some cases, the charter schools locally and throughout the state that are elementary or elementary and middle organized are scoring well. Elementary throughout the state is scoring well. And so, you know, it's tough to say, but you can, they have in the past had some positive outcomes locally.
Just in terms, and there was a national study done on student outcomes for charter schools. What they found was that in 37% of charter schools were functioning above the level of the parallel public schools. In the remainder of those instances, children were functioning either at the same level, or when they went to charter schools, the student outcomes were worse than they would have been in the public schools. The other thing that I would identify, because I think that Keith's point about governance and accountability is a really critical issue, and we tend to look at how charters are done in Rhode Island. We ought to recognize that in the majority of states that have instituted charters, there is an involvement on the part of community school committees and school boards in the governance and accountability for children who are in those charters. Rhode Island is not unique, but has opted for the State Department of Education being the body of accountability. So it functions as a state school board for charters, with no involvement from local communities.
And if my recollection is correct, obviously there's a cost for charter schools, but our cost to the town is not the total cost.
Right.
The state also pays a portion of the cost. We pay about $12,000 a year, and the state pays the remainder.
Right.
It's 17,000 out of our budget, 12,000 goes to them. Is that, did I identify that correctly?
I don't think so.
I don't think that's it.
The tuition costs are around $12,233 in the 13-14 year, and $12,749 in 14-15. And so I'm not sure where your 17's coming from.
Don't we lose state aid with each student that no longer comes to ours? Perhaps I'm...
True.
That is true. With declining enrollment, we have projections for the funding formula in terms of state aid. Every time our enrollment decreases, we also lose additional dollars.
Is that the 17 to
17
12,000?
is our per pupil expenditure that you might be referencing.
Okay, am I interpreting that number correctly? When a student goes to the charter schools, our budget goes down by 17. 12 of that, it goes to the charter, and the state hangs on to the remaining 5 and distributes that to the charter school.
It's not that our budget goes down by 17. What the per pupil expenditure cost is if you take our operational budget and you divide it by the number of children that we have, that's where you get the 17, I think it's 17,749 number. And so what you're seeing, it's not as directly correlated. The concept is good, but it's not as direct as what you're stating. Then we pay, so his child then goes to a charter school, we pay tuition for that child to go to the charter school, and also it's a loss of enrollment to us, is I think the overall understanding that you're building.
Okay.
And the charter school tuition is based, that formula is based primarily on the amount that's provided from the town transfer to the schools on a per pupil basis.
Right, that's where
That comes from.
That's where I'm going. As we increase our tax to maintain our budget, that will be reflected as a raise to them. Is that a fair assessment? Raise might not be the right adjective, but the per pupil cost is where that formula is based. So as the state funding comes down and our tax dollars increase to maintain that, our per pupil costs will go up additionally also. Is that a fair assessment? Or no, I don't have that correct?
Let me think that through for a minute.
If the town picks up a bigger piece, then the amount per pupil that the town is funding will drive the cost up.
I wonder whether, I mean, I think that Keith is asking important questions. And I wonder whether the best response isn't to develop kind of a one-page statement that explains the answers to the questions that Keith is raising, not just for Keith, but for the whole community. And the community really needs to understand the impact of charters on our per pupil cost, and the impact of enrollment on the reduction in state aid to education that comes to South Kingstown.
Let me try to explain it a little bit differently. To understand the state aid formula, outside of needing an advanced math degree, let me try to explain how it comes
Come on,
up.
a little quadratic equation.
I'll stay away from the equations. What I've put up on the board is that there's 3,341 students based on the state's formula. And the core funding is for $8,966 a student. So that means that the cost of education for our 3,341 students should be $29,955. Children that are at risk, which they call a success factor, is 628 students in our system that would qualify for what they call an education bump. It's cash. So you take the 628 and you multiply that times the 3,586, and it comes up to $2,252,000. Add those two numbers together, you got $32,207,000 is what cost of education should be in South Kingstown. The share ratio is 18.5%. That's not just based on tax effort. It's based on a couple of things. It's based on what annual family income is in South Kingstown in relation to what it is statewide. So like we're at about 122% with the state, so that's where you get the discount. So based on the education aid formula that's in place, South Kingstown should be getting $5,958,000 in state aid, period. That's it. Instead, we're entitled to $7,785,000 based on what we got in the current year. So what the state does is they say, okay, that's the difference between those two numbers of what you should have and what we're overpaying you is $1,827,000. So the state says, okay, there's 7 years left in getting everybody balanced so that they're not getting too much money, they're not getting too little money. So you divide the $1,877,000 by 7 years, and it means that you've got to cut $261,000 in aid that you should be getting next year so that you can bring the distance between what you're entitled to what you're actually getting down to zero. So that difference will be maxed out. So that's why our funding level would be at $7,524,000. That's what the state aid will be for next year's budget. If you consider student loss and you do the same formula and you assume that you're going to lose 50 kids next year, the difference is only $12,000. Why? Because it's not the core funding at $89.66 because you're only getting 18.5% of that. So yes, the charter schools do take money away from the school system if we had those. What the schools really lose is efficiency, because if there's 5 kids that go to a charter school that could fit into a classroom with no additional expenses from South Kingstown, then we could educate those kids without having to give up that $12,000. But I don't see where you are going to find a cause and effect that if you close a school, it's going to affect, because, again, it's just like when we talked about demographics earlier. People's attitudes change based on whatever is happening in a given time. People may look at 23 or 24 students as being negative, and they may decide they want to leave the charter school. Charter school may end up where their ratio goes up, or their scholastic reporting goes down, and there's negative there. I mean, when you look at what's taken place with the charters just in the last 3 years, you know, you're seeing substantial changes in what's going through those schools at this point. I mean, we're talking about going down to 89 students next year, where a couple of years ago, we were at 103.
Right, when we closed the school.
No, that was in 2012-13. There was no school closed in 2012-13.
No, but my point is, when we closed South Rule, charter schools went up. That's where I'm drawing the correlation between the two.
Charter schools and South Road School were around at the same time.
Right.
I think that, again, it's going to be a case where people make individual decisions, and it's school choice if people want to go to those schools, and also whether they're eligible for the schools. Remember that when they started out, there was a lottery. I'm not sure whether there's a lottery in every single school at this point.
There is still a lottery, and I would suggest that represents a default bias, because you have, I suspect we may agree that there's a correlation between a motivated parent who values education and a successful student, and vice versa. And if you have a student that could most greatly benefit from a charter school experience, it's conceivable that their parents don't even know about the charter school. So the only students that are allowed into charter schools are students whose parents are motivated to go through the application process.
Keith, the most I'd agree with is that people make individual choices based
Yeah.
on a number of different circumstances.
Based on the information they have.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there can be a cause and effect necessarily, but I do know when the all-day kindergarten was added, that was when the charter school enrollment in terms of the population of South Kingstown started to decline. So can you prove it 100%? No. But when you added the all-day K, the number of kids going to charters from South Kingstown definitely started to decline. And I agree with Mr. Vorhaven that, basically the school system outside of, some turmoil of a few years ago has been pretty stable, okay? And so I think that's why we're continuing to see a decline. I don't know that you can prove it. But then I do think that another piece and that's part of the conversation I think we need to have with the legislators, is all the testing that is coming in. People are concerned about that in our traditional public schools. And the amount of prep for the testing. And so I think that that's in the community. I think that the school committee typically has not wanted to talk about it, but it doesn't make it go away just because it's not being talked about. So that is something that could drive people to charters that should be a piece of the conversation.
Thank you.
Just for full accuracy, and the charters are responsible to report to RIDE the same kind of testing outcomes that public schools are, so that if parents are choosing to go to a charter school in order to not take standardized tests, they don't understand what the demands of RIDE are.
I think it's the way that the program is geared toward it.
If I might say, I mean, I've had, I have lots of experience in schools with my daughter, who's now a sophomore in high school. I mean, I think she's been to, just because of moving in and what have you, 6 or 7 schools, I believe. She was at the original Potter Hill School, which is now a charter school. We decided to take her out of there because the class size was too small. It was too small. There was not enough diversity. And my daughter's Chinese, so they got diversity right there. And she was in private school in Pennsylvania, and the class sizes were too small. It was just a little hothouse. It was just too small. There was not enough differences of opinion. Great schools, but I think you need that give and take if you're gonna, steel yourself and become a full person. I think sometimes, with there's 8 people in a class or 6 people in a class, it's too small. Unless it's an elective or something like that, it's just too small. I mean, when I was in 1st grade, I had 50 boys in my class.
You walked uphill.
Both ways.
Ted Miles, each way.
We did okay, and we did okay.
In the
All-
snow.
All 9 of us graduated from college, so, you know, we did okay.
And his sister was my principal.
Well, I think this ends the conversation, and I think we had a very lively conversation, and I want to thank everybody for all your hard work and participation, and thank the public. And I guess this ends the meeting. Do we need a motion, or? I don't think so.
I think so.
No? Okay.